I'm here at Southern Distilling to see if we can figure out a mash bill or a blend that will allow us to get whiskey out.
Each one of them has its own personality.
He's brave enough to let me try the single malt. I think if I were gonna just pick one of those single barrels though, it would be the 5-year 16 wheat there.
You are wrong.
All right, say you wanna start a whiskey brand, as I do. There's a couple of different ways you could go about doing that. The way I really wanna do that is to fire up a distillery, start distilling whiskey, wait for it to age, and then sell that. But I don't have that deep of pockets. Like, that takes a level of investment that's really hard for folks to do. Like, I have a lot of respect for people that can go that route. And so what a lot of people will do is start a distillery, make other things, make vodka, make moonshine, make whatever, something that doesn't have to age for very long, if at all, put that into the market, make enough money so that they survive until they can get their distillery up and going. Another route a lot of people go that don't want to start a distillery and all the overhead that comes with that, because they're super expensive, is they source whiskey or they contract distill whiskey. Now let me explain a little bit of a difference between those two. Contract distilled means you went to a place, you had them distill your whiskey. Basically, you used their equipment, but you set the mash bill, you had whatever you want made. The problem with that is you still gotta wait for that to age. You can make whiskey a lot cheaper that way. Somebody who's got a big operation, they could run barrels for a small brand in a day. Whereas if you have a distillery, you've got to distill constantly year-round maybe to make a similar number of barrels. What a lot of people do that want to start a whiskey brand is they source it from somebody who's made more whiskey than they're currently capable of selling, or someone that specializes in making whiskey for sourced whiskey brands. Now, you can source whiskey that's already aged and put that right into the market, but you really got to figure out a way to create an identity and make it unique from other products that may be sourced from that same distiller. So what we're going to try to do with our brand is a combination of all three. We are going to build a distillery. We bought the distillery in Kansas. We've got all of that equipment in storage, ready to be utilized. We still need a few pieces. That project is going to take some time unless the right property just magically pops up somewhere. So for right now, that's going to take some time, maybe a year, maybe two, before that distillery's up and going, unfortunately, unless something just magically speeds up. We also want to get whiskey into the market, because I can't float that distillery for 6 years. We have to have something that's generating revenue. I really would prefer to have non-Kentucky distillate, which instantly makes us different than a lot of folks. I don't want to use MGP, which makes a fine product, but is hard to differentiate. So today, I'm here at Southern Distilling in Statesville, North Carolina, to check out some of their products, to check out their inventory of thousands of barrels of aging whiskey, to see if we can figure out a mash bill or a blend or a combination of products that will work for us, that will allow us to get whiskey out, but be much different than anything else that's already in the market. And at some point, like once we figure out what that blend is, we will then have them contract distill that for us so that we can lower our costs, because we want to make an affordable whiskey for folks. We want to lower our costs by having it contract distilled and aged here until our facility is up and going, and then we will start distilling as much of it as we can there. So we're going to do a hybrid approach of all of the above. I've chosen all of the above for this project. So let's learn a little bit more about Southern Distilling. Let's try some whiskey. Me and Jill are here just on a mission to see if we can find something that excites us that we've never had before, and we're bringing you along for the journey. We've got a bunch of samples set up of different whiskeys to try and play around with. But first, we're gonna start with a little tour, and we've got our tour guide here, the #1 man, head honcho himself.
Now we're going to start with just kind of how Vienna and I started the company, 12 years ago now, how we got into it. Of course, talk a little bit about the history. We were talking a little bit earlier about how this is a business that loves its stories. We got a lot of stories, and about 2 of them are true. And we got some true stories here that we want to talk about, just the history of North Carolina, and particularly Statesville in general, relative to distilling going back 130 years ago. We're going to take you on a tour of all the production, the bottling, the rick houses, and then we'll get into the sampling.
So 12 years ago, you started before it was cool.
I started before it was cool. Because if you go back a decade ago, 12 years ago, you had all these craft brands, but they didn't really have a source that was going to produce what they wanted the way that they wanted. We lean way into producing for our clients and supporting our clients in a way that, frankly, I don't think anybody else in the business So they certainly weren't doing it 10 years ago. Today we support about 150 different clients. There's a lot of packages in here. You can see these are very old packages. All of these products were produced right here in Statesville, North Carolina. So if you go back 130 years ago, Statesville was considered the liquor capital of the world. I think that there's probably a lot of places that would say that, but we actually can back that story up. We were blessed with three things that are necessary to produce good whiskey. We had good water resources. We had access to grains and fermentables. Going back 120, 130 years ago, transportation was a big deal. What we had here in North Carolina was particularly in Statesville. Statesville was in the center of the state. At one point in time, it was the capital of the state, and it was really transportation that put this place on the map. There were trading paths here, and then those trading paths led ultimately to railroads. So we had two major railroads that crossed here. Because we had access to transportation, we had rectifiers that came from other parts of the country, primarily Northeast, and set up shop here in Statesville because we had everything else to make whiskey. We had the grain, we had the water, we've got the transportation. We had 6 major rectifiers doing business in the town of Statesville. 454 federally permitted distilleries. Now these were farm-based distilleries that were using little copper, pot stills, kind of like that over there. Upwards of 30,000 gallons every week were being shipped out of Statesville. And during the temperance movement and the Anti-Saloon League, we became a target. A faction came down to Statesville, and they were very, very effective at pushing Statesville into Prohibition in 1903. So that's full 17 years before the rest of the country. You don't just shut an industry down overnight, so they got kind of inventive. There's one in here from Donaholla. Might be in that case over there. It says Donaholla, North Carolina. Donaholla doesn't really exist. So what they did was they went and incorporated new towns outside the Statesville city limits so that they could continue production. Ultimately, people caught on and the entire state went dry in 1909. Now, fast forward, people think about North Carolina as being, it's a moonshiner state, right? But nobody ever asks the question, why moonshine? Well, because you don't put 450 families out of business overnight, but they really established that whole moonshine economy. And then from there, you had transportation that leads to, doing it in trunks of cars, NASCAR. And so there's the rest of the story that nobody ever talks about. That's a true story. We have the tax records, a lot of all that just handwritten correspondence between the retailers that were selling it and the producers down here. It's really an incredible history.
Like before it was all shut down, were they making bourbon or was it just
unaged? They were making bourbon, but they didn't call it bourbon. Right. At that point in time, bourbon wasn't really a thing, but they called it corn whiskey. And they made a lot of rye too. So it was primarily corn whiskey. You can see right here. There's that Laurel Valley corn whiskey in that glass jug. Most of it was in these crocks right here. Hunting Creek was a rye whiskey, and it was purportedly one of the most widely distributed ryes. We own that name today. We've re-released it 130 years after the fact.
Explain how running the same mash bill different ways affects the product that comes out of that.
We're one of the most technically advanced distilleries, period, in the nation. And a lot of that comes from my personal background and what I did in mechanical and process engineering and automation in my previous career. We can run that still, the doublers, the condensers, and control it in ways that a lot of other people would find it difficult to do. Using the high wine and low wine condensers, running different temperatures, how we run the doubler, how we run reflux, has a dramatic impact in that final distillate. A lot of people think that the mash bill is the most important differentiator, and I would disagree. I would say it's number 3 or number 4. I'd say that yeast is probably number 1, cooperage is number 2, and then somewhere in there is how you're running your still, how you're running your process.
What we're trying to do here is educate ourselves, first of all, like these are things we need to learn, but also, explain to folks how you can differentiate, like having the same mash bill. Now the problem is if you go buy that mash bill aged somewhere in a warehouse, you're probably getting the same thing that somebody else got if they went and bought it aged in a warehouse. But we're talking about contract distilling to where I come to you and I say, make this for me.
The concept of terroir, which people talk about in wine all the time, it's absolutely there in distilled spirits. So we're the only contract distiller that I'm aware of at scale, at this kind of scale, that we grow the majority of the grain. If I can control how that grain is produced, particularly the corn, that has a big impact in the final product. Our aging conditions are going to be different. We're similar to Kentucky and Tennessee. All of these things have an impact on the product, what we would call, again, the terroir of the product. You can take the exact same mash bill, same yeast, and get very different results depending on how you run it, the cooperage that you use, and where you age it. I think that's the thing that makes this industry so amazing. No offense to us distillers, I'm our master distiller, but I think that we get too much credit. A lot of this really comes in the blending. How you take the different barrels, how you blend those barrels. I mean, if you go to Scotland or Ireland, it's all about the blending. And I think we're beginning to recognize that here in bourbon country. Yes, the maker has got to do a great job, but the magic comes, I think, in how you take all those disparate barrels and blend them to make something that's really special. And then if you can do that consistently, that's really the other trick. It doesn't take a lot of space to make a lot of whiskey. It takes a lot of space to store it. So we lay down about 20,000 barrels a year in here. Our footprint is not dissimilar from Maker's Mark, but of course they lay down more barrels. But really what takes up the space is the storage. We've got 2 warehouses here on site, and then we've got another property where we can build up to 12 more. So we grow 100% of our corn, 100% of our red soft winter wheat, which is in the field and about that tall right now. We're growing more and more of the rye. We used to grow 100% of the rye. We outran our ability to produce it, so we're getting better at getting better yields on the rye. What's ironic about that is 100 years ago, we were probably better at growing rye than we were corn. A lot of people say, well, why do you want to grow your own grain? A part of that is that we can kind of protect ourselves from price hikes. But the main reason is really not that. It's that I want what I want. My soft red winter wheat, I like that better than a hard wheat. I like the way that tastes. I like the way it runs. More importantly, since we're talking about bourbon, how we produce that corn, more specifically, how we apply fertilizer, when we apply fertilizer, what rates we apply fertilizer, what type of fertilizer, was it synthetic or organic? All that has an impact on the distillate. A lot of people don't think about it. And we kind of learned this lesson the hard way about 10 years ago. We brought some rye from an elevator, big elevator. I mean, not rye, excuse me, corn. It produced a lot of hydrogen sulfide. What we were able to determine is that ultimately how nutrients were applied to that crop had an impact on some of these things that we didn't want. So we're like, okay, if we want to control for that and be consistent, then we got to produce it. The more that we can do here locally, ourselves, with our family, with our neighbors, I think the better off we are. The other thing that I think is really important, all that grain is produced regeneratively. It's a focus on soil conservation. So we're going to use no-till drill to eliminate soil erosion. We're going to put more animal byproducts, whether it's chicken litter or even spent grains, back on the field as opposed to chemical fertilizers. Crop rotation is a huge part of this. If you go out to the Midwest, they just grow corn, and corn takes a lot of nitrogen, and you got to dump all that chemical nitrogen back on there. We do crop rotation. So we never plant corn in the same place twice. The other part of this is healthy soil sequesters a hell of a lot of carbon dioxide. When people talk about CO2 emissions, one of the best things you can do is get back to the way that we grew a generation ago. This is not a new concept. Regenerative agriculture is a new term, but it's a new term really applied to an old concept. So we're going to go from corn to a barrel of whiskey in one of these warehouses in about 4 days. Spent grains are going in those tanker trucks right over here, and then that's going back out to feed cattle. We're producing enough spent grain to feed out about 2,400 head of cattle. The other thing that we pay a lot of attention to here is energy efficiency. We consume a lot of BTUs to heat water, and we burn a lot of electricity typically to cool that water back down using mechanical chillers. All of the cook water, which is usually in a cook process, all that water and grain goes into a cooker, and you're hitting that water with steam. We don't use any steam directly to heat that water. We're scavenging the waste heat off the bottom of the column, and we're using that to preheat all that water. If I wasn't doing that, I'd be burning electricity to cool it. So we use a heat exchanger. That's all heat that we are recycling. When we're building out a mash bill, the mash bill, it's built out by weight or mass. It's not volumetric like a measuring cup, a 70, 16, 14. 70% corn, 16% wheat, 14% malted barley. I can't do it volumetrically based on bushels because malt weighs a lot less per bushel than does wheat or corn. What you see right here is we've got 2,556 pounds of corn loaded out into a weigh bin or a weigh hopper. From there, that corn is going to transfer up an auger and into a mill. Most distilleries use hammer mills. Hammer mills are really efficient, but they're kind of blunt instruments. They're just going to do what they're going to do. So we've got a 2-high roller mill. Actually, that's going to come out. We've got a 3-high going in there. And what that means is that there are 2 pairs of rollers, 1 pair down below, 1 pair up top. And we can adjust the gap in those rollers to get the grind results that we want. What these guys do every 12 hours is they're going to take a sample of that grain and then go put it through a sieve analysis, and I'll show you what that looks like. But basically, they're going to take that milled grain and they're going to measure what the distribution of particles is by weight. And then from there, they can come in and then fine-tune the mill itself.
Is each grain milled separately?
Yes, so each grain is milled separately for 2 reasons. One is that we're going to set the mill differently, but more importantly, because we're going to cook in that cooker each grain at a different temperature. What we have here is a big old giant empty cooker that's getting ready to get filled. They're going to run this cooker about 9 times a day. 9 runs of this cooker produces 5 to 6 fermenters, and that's what they'll run each day. If you want to take a peek up there, you can see what the empty cooker looks like. You can see the big agitator in there spinning. Maybe a little different about our operation is we use a lot of automation, and really a better term for that rather than automation would be industrial controls. Industrial controls allow us to monitor processes real time. Then the system itself, not a human, is automatically adjusting the process or the plant running conditions to hit the set point that we told it we want it to run at. Now, the reason that automation is important for us in particular is not just so that we can do things consistently, but remember, unlike a lot of producers, we're not just running a few mash bills. If I'm running a 75-21-4, which is one of the most ubiquitous mash bills there is, right? I've got some clients that want it run this way, and other clients that want it run that way. So if you don't have the ability to fine-tune that system and control it, you can't do that. This guy is heading to the beer well. So down at the bottom of that beer well, there's a big agitator just sitting there keeping it all mixed up and stirred up. This is one of the things that I think is fun to watch, these fermenters. Each one of them has its own personality, but you can see this one is spinning in a clockwise orientation. It can be very therapeutic to come up here and just watch the fermenters. So again, this is our production lab. It's not our analytical lab. We're going to go in there in a little bit. The motor control center is communicating with all those industrial computers out there, kind of like left brain, right brain. So those industrial computers are saying, hey, you told me you wanted to be at 190 degrees. I'm at 185 degrees. Therefore, something needs to happen. That's where the motor control center comes in, is that it is taking all that messaging from the PLCs out there, and then it's conditioning the power. So it's literally turning motors on, off, spinning them up, slowing them down. Now, the other thing is that we just took that grain sample, so every single, even though we're growing that grain, we're still gonna test ourselves. Okay. Hey, Maria and Yolanda keep this, I don't even know how they do it. What you see is how this facility is 24/7. This is the cleanest distillery in the United States, period. And most of it's done by these 2 ladies here. I just have no idea how they do it. So we have 2 Vendome columns. These are some of the small columns that these guys built, more than a decade ago. These were some of their, now they've built many, 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 many more in the past decade since it's gotten to be a pretty popular business, right? It really doesn't matter whether it's a big 48-inch column, a Buffalo Trace, or a 60-inch column, or our 18s and 14s. They all basically work the same way. That's a 500-gallon cooker, 250-gallon pot still. We can run 400 barrels a week on this system. That system, we run 2 barrels a week. We'll do experimentation here, experimental batches. So we talked about stories. Let me tell you a story that's not true. Everybody uses limestone-rich water. Not true. Everybody starts with limestone-rich water, then they work hard to get rid of the limestone. If you're pulling water out of a natural aquifer, the chemistry in that aquifer changes seasonally. Really, every time it rains, the chemistry in that, whether it's alkalinity, salinity, and if we're looking for consistency, we don't want things changing. The other thing that most people probably would recognize, anybody that has hard water, mineral content, they love the flavor of it. They don't like the way that it leaves white residue and deposits all over the place. Same thing is true with all this equipment. You don't want your boiler full of limestone-rich water. So we're heading back to bottling. This is the kind of the end of the run. This is our slow line. Our high-speed line is sitting back there, and we're getting ready to put it in on actually this side and swap up and put this one in over there. Where that line will do 12 to 15 bottles a minute on a good day, this line will do 60 bottles a minute. So the way that we've been doing it for years and years and years is we got a couple of people in here, put a cork in, rubber mallet, put a cork in, rubber mallet, which is fine unless you're doing 200,000 cases a year, and then you need something more high speed. Some of the barrels that you're going to be tasting are sitting right here.
These are ones you've brought from the rick house, or are they aged here?
No, they've been here. Like, we filled these at 125 proof. I didn't think it was a great idea, but I kind of like the result.
Did you find any over 140?
No. You know, we typically fill at 110. You know, it used to be the federal limit up until 62, 63, when Seagram's petitioned the feds to allow a fill up to 125. That's good for a distiller's bottom line, but it's not good for the consumer because, you know, consumers paying for a lot of water. Companies like Makers and a lot of other Kentucky distillers go in at 107 to 110. To say I don't care about the bottom line would be a lie. But we care about the bottom line in as much as, okay, but you got to be doing it right at the same time. Usually, if you do it right, everything else works its way through. We'll head up to the rick house, then we'll go do some tasting.
Do it. So you got a few barrels.
There's 22,000 in here.
How many total do you have aging?
65,000. So if you can't find something here.
All right, is there any magical spot in any of these rick houses where you think the best stuff comes from?
No, and here's the reason. Because these rick houses were designed specifically to age whiskey. They have a series of vents along the bottom. And those vents open up and allow that air to pull through these stacks. See how we've got all that space between each one of these stacks? Each pallet is a real pallet with airflow, so we're getting air all the way around that barrel. These barrels are allowed to get hot in the summer and cold in the winter.
For the guy in the comments right now, type it in, this is not a rick house. Okay, technically not a rick house, it's a warehouse. Okay. Lighten up, it's not that serious,
yeah,
okay?
And for the guy writing the comment, I would say that go look at what all the big guys are building. They're not building rick houses. When you go for your, hey, I'm a connoisseur, you know, tour, but I'm not in the business, yeah, they're gonna take you into a rick house because it's romantic. Do you know why they built rick houses 75 years ago, 100 years ago? Didn't have a forklift. Guess what? All those guys today, this is what they're building.
I don't know too many people hating on palletized aging. I just know there's somebody that's gonna be a technical, you know, there's like technically not a rick. There's always that one guy.
We love you anyway.
Oh, you're welcome here. I don't know if I've ever seen anybody with a bung in the side palletized.
So I do that. That's something that we did. Nobody else was doing it at the time, and I don't know if anybody else is or not. I knew that it was easier for me to fill these barrels on their heads, but most people were gonna dump from the bilge. So we've specified typically both the bilge bung as well as that top bung. Just a matter of convenience for our clients. So this may be of interest to you, TJ. We don't really do weddings and stuff like that here, even though it's an event center. It's primarily for industry events. Most of our clients, they don't own a distillery, therefore they don't have a home place. So we've kind of built this to give our clients a home place. If they want to do a big release, they want to do a GSM with their distributor or do some sort of PR event, you know, you could use this space to do it.
Okay. See, now, forget the whiskey. Let's get into cars. I just want the garage now. Like, I don't even know about I forget we're at a distillery now. I just need this garage space. Is that a Riviera?
It's not a Riviera, it's a Tornado.
Got the pop up and down headlights.
Wow, these are awesome.
Yes, much nicer than my junk. You get your projects done. You got a thing for these Tornadoes, huh?
Well, that's a car that my mom drove. She always said that this was her favorite car. I looked for many, many years to find one in the same color. This thing it's like a time capsule. This thing brings back a lot of memories. It smells just like Mom's car did 40 years ago or 50 years ago, however long. I guess it was 50 years ago now. I'm old as hell. And do not put your hand in there and let your brother close it.
You found out the hard way?
It's gonna hurt. Any of the influencer stuff that we do, anytime I'm releasing a product or doing a tasting, we'll do in this room. Our home is your home. If you're working with us, then, you know, it's your space to use. We're not going to charge you a fee or anything like that. The fire truck is a 50-foot ladder truck, and it belonged to the volunteer fire department it's called Trinity Volunteer Fire Department, which is the one that services our farm. Our neighbor, ever since I was a kid, he was always in their leadership. He called me one day, his name is John. John calls me, he said, Pete, you want to buy a fire truck? And I got in there. This thing is like new money. I mean, like brand new. It's like, why do you even have a ladder truck? Well, the insurance company made us buy this thing like 20-some years ago, but all we got is chicken houses out here, so we don't need a ladder truck. So I made him a nice donation and bought the truck for $1. Our son's name is Trinity, so I took him out there. They had a thing up, there was water going. I was like, happy birthday. He was like, you've lost your damn mind. Our son is a metal worker, so he did all this patinaed copper.
How's he at fixing a damaged column?
He's actually really good. Yeah, all the big beer wells that you saw, they started out as fermenters, and then he welded on that 4-foot section to take them on up and did all the external bracing on the bottom. He's a very good welder. He's also an artist. This is what he loves doing crazy stuff like this. That's a landscape from where he lived up in Boone, up in the mountains.
So behind me, we have the HPLC. So we run the HPLC, which is a high performance liquid chromatography for every single cook, every mash cooler transfer, every beer well drop, as well as every distillation spent grains that we have. What we're doing is running a fermentation status analysis. So we look at our polysaccharides, so our starches, our DP4s, DP3s, the breakdown into our disaccharides, our glucose and our maltose, to our maltose, and then down to our monosaccharides, our glucose and our fructose. That tells us how efficient our cook is, and then where we have an issue in that cook, whether it's gonna be our alpha amylase or our glucoamylase. All of that gets graphed by Madeline. She'll actually plot it against all of the shifts to make sure every shift is consistent, shift to shift, mash bill to mash bill, day to day. Then from there, we look at our lactic acid, our acetic acid, and our glycerol, just trying to determine how stressed our yeast is. And on that, we try to make sure that we're having the healthiest environment while pushing our fermentation while also limiting our contamination. We actually clean our fermenters every time we drop them, so we not only clean them with a safe caustic and a sanitizer, but we also steam them, so we essentially pasteurize them. Then we're also looking at our methanol and our ethanol production, so we're looking at our conversion from that sugar all the way through to our ethanol to make sure that we're efficient and it's not being stolen by any bacteria, which is why we'll look at that contamination as well. Then in our mash cooler, we're focusing on our contamination rate, make sure we're cleaning it because that is the hot spot for all contamination. So we're actually really lucky that we clean that thing and we run it as well as we do because it is not a hot spot for contamination in our facility. Then from there, in our beer well, we're comparing that ethanol production to our breakdown of our starch, and then on the back end for the column, we're looking at our spent grains to make sure we're not only extracting all of our ethanol during the distillation, but we're not having the column clogged up with all of the sugar left over.
So when she talks about the hot spots, going back to the hot spots, we're not just taking a sample from a place. We're taking multiple samples throughout the day, each shift, from multiple locations. So if we've got a problem with lactobacillus, it's not a plant-wide issue, it's a valve-wide issue. Or, it's located to like one fermenter, so we can stop it and control it right there, which is hugely important, not just from a yield standpoint, but really for me, from a flavor standpoint.
What flavor does that add?
I mean, how would you describe that flavor when you've got, lactobacillus lactic acid? I call it skunky. It's got a particular, do you know what the chemical compound is?
No, but the problem is that once it hits that barrel, there's really no saying exactly what route it'll take. You can actually have like acetic acid, right? So the same kind of thing, bacteria, it'll go in your barrel and you'll end up getting a banana smell, a banana taste. Now again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Some people pick that out, some people don't want that.
And there are some brands out there that really like that banana, and what a lot of people don't recognize is that very often that flavor is really the result of a fault. So it's not a pure distillate, it's not a clean distillate, it's a fault. Now maybe you like that fault. And the barrel is going to fix a lot of problems if you give it time. But if you're not asking the barrel to fix the problems, then we can spend more money on toasting. So if I'm going to have to use a number 4 char because I got to clean that distillate up, what's the point in toasting because I just burned it out? So all of our barrels are going to be toasted, and then we're going to go with a less intense char because we don't really need it. And that now you got the best of both worlds.
So a heavier char is basically used more for filtration.
So it's the same stuff that's in your water filters. If you've got a activated carbon, activated charcoal water filter, you don't see brown water. You don't taste anything from that because carbon is inert. What is giving you the color and the flavor is what is just beyond that char. That's where we're getting into the wood sugars that have been caramelized and the vanillin, all of that stuff. None of that comes from char.
The easiest way to think about it is the first thing that doctors will tell you, right, is if you eat something bad, you're gonna have to eat some kind of activated carbon. It's to soak it all up. That's essentially what the barrel's doing. It's filtering it, making sure it gets rid of all those a lot of the yucky stuff. And like Pete said, if we already have a clean distillate going in, we don't need to rely on that char as much. And then toasting the barrels essentially pre-breaks down those wood sugars, so you don't have to wait as long, which allows us to have distillate and aged spirits from a really good distillate at 2 that taste better than some 4 years, because we not only have that clean distillate, but we're using that and the toasting to kind of have the best of both worlds, as opposed to relying heavily on that char. So then behind me we have a GAC, which is just fancy terminology for a grain analysis computer. So like Pete said, it starts with the grain, right? We're really lucky that all of our corn and all of our wheat come from local farmers, so we'll actually grade every load that comes in a small bag like that. We'll run it through our GAC. It'll tell us our test weight as well as our moisture content, make sure it's healthy, make sure it's within our standards. We'll also run it on a handheld NIR, which is in the cabinet. That'll tell us our composition. So it'll tell us our crude carbohydrate. It won't tell us exactly starch, but it kind of gives us that good idea. Our protein content, our oil, as well as just verifying our moisture content. Then Madeline will actually go through that entire bag, to be clear, not the truck, but that entire bag, which is a vertical sample of the truck, with a tweezer and essentially a magnifying glass. And she'll pick out all the kernels that she deems outside of our quality specification. She'll go to our production supervisor and be like, hey, I'm either concerned or not concerned, this load passed, it failed, we need to talk to the farmers. And then we'll go directly back to the farmers to make sure that we have the highest quality grain and work together with them to make sure that it maintains that way. Then from there, we just have our centrifuge, which those are our HPLC samples. So like Pete said, we're taking multiple samples throughout the process. It's an average of about 30 samples per day. We're running this machine every other day, which means it's about 24 hours worth of samples every day. And then she will actually input all of those after integrating everything. It's a very intensive process to make sure that we do it right and we have hands-on to every sample. Then behind you over there, we have our Alcotest densitometer. So we're using that for our bottle fill height and our bottle proof. Make sure everything coming off our line is within the federal specification. Make sure it's not only at the proof, but it's also at the correct fill height as well. And we also have the ability to utilize a local lab at App State Fermentation Sciences. We make sure that our offsets are correct. So for our double shot, we have the ability to do that on site and make sure that we don't need to wait a lot, like multiple days, to get that proof back. We're able to do that in-house.
So hopefully y'all can see why we're here. What we're looking for is the best quality product we can find, enough variety so that we can build something unique to our palate, something that is replicable but also scalable. With scale comes, an economy of scale that will hopefully allow us to put it at a price point to where it's accessible to a lot of folks. Like, we want an ultra premium whiskey, we just don't want an ultra premium price. So we're gonna see what we can do here, try a bunch of different things. I assume we got a bunch of different mash bills and things here?
We're gonna concentrate on bourbon. I have pulled out a rye just for you to try. I think I need a couple more, but we're gonna focus on the bourbons. So this is a wheated bourbon. It's 60 corn, 30 wheat, 10% malted barley.
Oh my goodness.
I know, that smells delicious.
Would you say this was the wheated to start with?
It's a 60, 30, 10, 7 to 8 years old.
This is delicious.
Little barrel char coming through. That would be a real good ingredient if you wanted to add a little of that kind of toasty wood note to it. But man, I love that. Maybe a slightly younger version of that, but that is beautiful.
I don't have a slightly younger version, but what we can do is we can always blend it.
Are you saying all the barrels of that you have are that old?
Yeah.
Or, okay, how many of those do you think you have?
Several hundred. Now I've got tens of thousands of the 70, 16, 14.
Right.
Which is also the
Well, that's also a thing we have to consider here as we're doing this. How much whiskey will we sell? And what we don't want is to have the first few batches to be a certain quality and then it drop off because the ingredients we were using, or change dramatically because the ingredients we were using were considerably different. Now, you can blend and kind of get a similar profile with maybe different inputs, but we do have to kind of think about how much whiskey we plan on putting out and make sure we're thinking about something that we can keep consistent for future iterations and releases of it. Because I've seen quite a few. I know there's some popular ones out there right now that the first few batches were absolutely incredible, and then now they're on batch 60 and it's like, it's okay.
This is a 5-year-old 70, 16, 14.
This is the one you make the most of.
It's the wheated that I make the most of, yeah.
I'm debating, our first release could be a wheated. It could be a blended 4 grain. It could be whatever we find that's super interesting. Oh yeah, see, that's nice too. I'm already got to do some little tweaking here.
I was gonna say, if you're not gonna blend those two together, I'm gonna be shocked.
The oak actually comes through stronger when I blend it. Like, it's a little more harsh. It's a little more well-rounded when you just leave it alone. So I want to see if I can just get about half as much of that.
This
one
is
in there.
also foolproof.
Yes.
Well, we like foolproof though. I'm not saying our first release will be foolproof, but we like the proof. This says 109, 110. We would probably want to be between 100 and 110 at release.
It's amazing what just a little bit of water does.
Yeah, now we're getting there. I think just a touch of that to a lot of that is really nice. I think if I were going to just pick one of those single barrels though, it would be the 5-year 16 wheat there.
No, you are wrong.
We may have to come do a TJ blend, a Jill blend, put it out for patron to vote.
And I guarantee you, Jill's gonna win.
Okay, this is a 7016 14, same as this. Okay, single barrel.
Any difference in specs? Is it older, younger, just a different barrel?
It's just a different barrel.
I get a little bit of that, what I always describe as like the peanut.
To me, that note is here in this one, but it's much softer and subtler, where it's much more strong and dominant in this guy here.
This is the barrel that won best single barrel and then took best overall bourbon at the 2022 New York World Wine and Spirits competition. So I think it's the first and only time a non-Kentucky brand has won that competition.
See, for me with this one, really nice. All of them really nice. We're picking nits here, folks. Like, we are splitting hairs. Like, we are trying to be like hyper particular. This is delicious. It has just a little bit of like a drying kind of oakiness on the finish to me that I don't want.
So you're not gonna like me for saying this. I prefer the 7016 14.
Do you?
I do too. All right, we are going to show you some of the highlights here of tasting this whiskey. We'll come back later and actually try to do some blending if we find something here that works for us. But if you want to see the extended cut of us sitting down and going through all of these samples and all of the little notes and differences we get in them, you can check that out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Brewzle. If you'd have handed that to me, there's a major distiller in Kentucky, I would have said, okay, that's their product. To me, it's a very high proof kind of Knob Creek Jim Beam profile almost.
Now, would you ever blend a rye with a wheat? Like, is that?
Yeah, we can blend anything. We don't want a rye whiskey, but a high rye bourbon inside, because you want to be able to say bourbon on the label for what we're doing.
This is something to be used for blending or single barrels.
This is interesting though. It's like an orange note. It smells like a Green River almost.
It's super high proof.
What's the proof?
130.
Oh, that's not super high proof. That's that's middle of the road. I'm kidding.
You've got all the building blocks, and it's just a question of how do you put those building blocks together to get just what you want.
My goal is to prove that gray bourbon does not have to be made in Kentucky. Gray bourbon is made in Kentucky. Most gray bourbon comes from Kentucky. It's only because Kentucky's been doing it forever, but it can be made anywhere. And this right here is a great bourbon that was made right here in Statesville, North Carolina. If you've got a liquor store and you're interested in carrying the Oak Bowery brand, there is a form linked down in the description. Fill that out. Let us know where your store is located. Give us your contact information. That will be the first place we go when we try to look for folks that will carry this. Like, we may not go wide distribution. We may just put it in a few stores in each market. Fill it out. Maybe you'll be one of the stores. So we are going to try a single. He's brave enough to let me try the single malt. What did you say the odds were that I'm gonna like it?
70%.
He's already admitted he's not on social media. He does not watch this YouTube channel if he put this at 70%. We like the Cuvée cask from Virginia Distilling. We liked the Westward that they sent us that's finished in a bunch of stuff. So we liked finished whiskey. Now, I'm not 100% on board with it like I am a bourbon, but I was like, I could enjoy a pour of that. So he's got a chance. I don't think that chance is 70% though. Dude, that's not a malt. Give me a freaking break. That's all like fruity, like
100% malt done the American way.
Dude, that tastes absolutely nothing like a single malt. I would have bet my house that that's not a single malt whiskey.
Is it not delicious?
It's fantastic.
All this old stuff has already been sold, so we have to lay down some more
Okay.
for you. But yeah, you can do this.
How old is that?
That's 5 years.
Best single malt I've ever had in my entire life, because it doesn't taste like what I think a single malt should taste like. You don't need to finish this to cover it up. This is light, it's fruity, like there are no harsh flavors like I get on most single malts. As a content creator, you really need to have strongly held opinions of things. I love it when my opinion is completely and totally wrong. A lot of people will say, you're gonna find a Scotch you like. You're eventually gonna come around to Scotch. No way, I'm never going to really love a malt whiskey. There's never gonna be a malt whiskey I'm completely on board with. There's one.
I'm just going to gift this to you right now.
There you go. I'll take that bottle right there. I need to share that with the world. This is probably the most mind-bending thing I've ever had since the Frey Ranch cream cheese funfetti frosting Weeders. That's an occasion whiskey, like it's super rich and sweet and weird. Like you just never see that note in a whiskey. The fact that this is a malt and I want more of it is just a weird place for me to be. We had a nice blend. This upstaged everything we did. Just forget everything we've done here. Had a great time here at Southern. Just found out the name is going to be changing to Statesville Contract Distilling. I think we found something that we're really excited about. We've got some experiments we talked about off camera we're going to do as well to see if those are products we can bring to the market. And Lord have mercy, we probably need to do a single malt. I think next time we come up, which will probably be fairly soon, like we want to start getting this blend done, trying to get some bottling done. We're going to try to get back up here. We're going to do the blend, bring in a few patrons to do that, bring in some of the regulars, a few new folks, and then we're probably going to do a distillery takeover here the day after, and then so everybody can come try the blend. So let me know if that sounds like a good time to you, that you can come, a few people come help us blend, and even more people can come try it the day after. Before we end this video, we have a commitment. When we do the distillery takeover here, we are going to allow y'all to try 4 barrels of this single malt. You vote for it in the first 30 minutes. We're gonna give you a 30-minute window. You vote for it, whichever one wins. We're gonna bottle it up right here. You can buy a bottle and take it home right then from the gift shop.
That's right.
Committed right there. If you wanna try this single malt, this is gonna be the only time you're gonna be able to do it until God knows when. The people who are buying this, you don't know what they're gonna do with it. They may finish it, they may do all sorts of weird stuff to try what we're trying here. This is the only time you're gonna be able to do it. Appreciate y'all watching all the way to the end. See y'all in the next one.